All right, so there's there's a mindset in moral theory and ethics where, you know, violence is considered something as often as possible to be wrong in itself. Um, and which leads to, a lack of acceptance for homicide, saying that homicide is always wrong, blah, 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 militarism versus anti militarism. It opens up into a whole thing. Um, and this has been this view has emerged very rapidly, uh, you know, beginning in the 1960s with the rise of the hippie movement and stuff. And there's a lot of different accounts on this and stuff and I hate to bring them up, from the right wing organizations. They tend to say that uh, this is a result of, you know, leftist, basically an education and leftist ideas. Any education and leftist ideas is automatically written off as like some brainwashing effort, blah blah blah. Um, and now here's the grain of salt you need to be aware of. The United States government had a legitimate concern during the McCarthy era uh, that leftists were trying to take over American organizations because they were, and it was found time and time again that Soviet agents had actually snuck into the United States. Um, they had, I know they had used California and stuff, and this is kind of parodied and uh, reported comedically in mass media and stuff, but it actually did happen. But this is the reality of having, any kind of civilization in this world and stuff. If it, but this is that's going way on the tangent here. So addressing the topic, when does homicide become murder? When does reclamation uh, or finding become theft? And because the topic here we're trying to talk about is like legal story building and stuff. Making accounts. Um, there's important premises here. The manner and point of time in which one begins an account, raw records, along with the rules of reporting description, plays a big role in who is liable and what the liability is and stuff. Because the word choice and how far in the beginning you want to start makes a big difference. But if somebody, if any organization or organizations can hijack the history and stuff, um, or if any entity can do so, then that really skews things and stuff. And the way human beings psychologically interpret things becomes uh, uh, becomes a factor too, because we tend to, really have nonsensical ways of interpreting things sometimes. Um, Human brains are far from perfect biocomputing devices, far from perfect. Anyway, so what are some controversial historical events to make this topic more relevant? We have the homicide of Trayvon Martin in 2015. Um, whether it's murder or whether uh, Trayvon attempted murder, blah blah blah, it is it was up for it's up for a huge topic of controversy and debate and stuff. And I don't want all of that sentiment to distract from the point here. So I'm not gonna get into that. Um, I believe that the Department of Justice, you know, was the best organization for this matter. Um, Seeing as, I mean, nobody else had really done their part. You know, this is, by the way, this is all the way in Florida too. Um, so, and I'm speaking of this as a New Yorker. I was living in Georgia at the time, so yeah, eh, I don't like as so I'm quite the outsider to be talking about this as well. So there's going to be some information I'm missing too. Um, Now, and then another topic is the October 7th, 2023 invasion of Israel. This topic is also going to be avoided because people are highly selective about the facts on this. Um, then there's a homicide of Austin Metcalf on April 2nd, 2025. This topic is going to be avoided as well because DOJ is still working on this, and it's not exactly the smartest thing to talk about what police and lawyers and judges, etc., are doing, um, because their work is it's protected business intelligence. There's SSPII involved, and everything. There's so many things, and nobody should. It can lead to disruptions, and there has to be proper proceedings there. They have to do their job at a certain level of competence and blah blah blah. So then, another. This is I mean, this isn't. I mean, yeah, this is mildly controversial here. It's because it's clear we're going to Daryl Lance Abbott and stuff. It's very clear he was murdered. This is straight up murder and stuff. Um, he was murdered in the Al Roosevelt nightclub in Ohio and stuff. I'm just having that there as an example because it is an extremely important point in history. Uh, it's very rare that a musician will be a blip in natural history, uh, but he did, he did, and uh, like what he did had significance for art as a whole, not just music and not just heavy metal music and stuff. That's why. And art is a big part of human culture. It has been going back to the Neolithic times, Paleolithic times, even the time of the Neanderthals, maybe even before that, when humans, when the hominids were just taking their feces and drawing lines with it, or drawing lines in the sand with sticks or whatever, because you know they were coming up with like some new group behavior for whatever. Um, the way chimps interact, with the way chimps and that type of a creature interacts is very interesting, because they it's pretty clear by account, by just watching, like when they're signaling and stuff, and when they're processing information in a different way. But anyway, that's a different topic. We'll talk about human psychology and ape psychology at another point, and all of the science surrounding that and stuff. Because if anything is interesting in this world, it's animals, dogs, apes, including humans. I guess some birds. No, some birds are definitely awesome. And many reptiles, I guess. Mostly mammals, mostly the more sentient mammals, though, because these are the ones most relevant to the human way of life and everything. So, all right. So let's go to this. Now, going to the homicide of Trayvon Martin. This happened in 2012 and stuff. And unfortunately, University of Missouri Kansas, they had all this time to come. They had all that time to come up with the accounts, except the bringing up somebody named Batchelor, not really showing the developing of how Batchelor appears in this story. We don't know anything about Batchelor. It says Batchelor opened a sliding door and stuff. It says Jonathan Good. It goes from Jonathan Good to Batchelor, and this is the first mentioning of Batchelor right here. And it just fine. We'll get some webcam stuff. It goes. Nice. It goes to Batchelor here, and as you can see, and he's introduced as a completely trailing referent, leads you to nothing, basically, which is horrible. That's it, you know, if he's one of the witnesses and stuff, then we want to know some things about him. But whatever. So anyway, so that's one issue with the account. But aside from that, the person gave considerable effort. So going from the beginning to the end of it, of the main events and stuff. We're not going to talk about how Zimmerman interacted with police. That's a separate account. And this is more or less how it goes, right here, bullet for bullet. Trayvon and Zimmerman basically spot each other at the same time. Trayvon's heinous, grievous crime here is walking at night in the rain. Whoa, big freaking deal, right? Somebody's walking at night in the rain. And by the way, he's 17 years old and stuff. I don't know. So, you know, so Zimmerman decides to chase after him physically and stuff, meaning that he took his big bulk and ran after little 17-year-old Trayvon. This this child. Look at it. Look at his face and stuff. Yeah, he's nowhere near the size of Zimmerman. I don't know what the hell Zimmerman was thinking, but he wasn't thinking. That's the problem. At the time, Trayvon's on the phone with his friend, and Trayvon mentions Zimmerman. Trayvon mentions Zimmerman spying on him. So the kid says, "Oh, he might be a rapist, so run." And so Trayvon runs. Okay, blunder, not a crime, but a blunder. And it's kind of like an old adage and stuff. Like, when you're scared, the worst thing you can do is react out of fear and stuff. That, if anything, will spin out a situation. It's something like that. Yeah, so Zimmerman was chasing him in light of this, and the police the police instruct Zimmerman to stop chasing him. However, Zimmerman keeps chasing him. Are you supposed to disobey instructions when law enforcement gives you an instruction, and it's where the instruction is actually legal, a legal act and stuff? No, you're not. You're actually supposed to listen to what they say. Okay? This officer was not telling Zimmerman to rob Trayvon. He was telling him to stop chasing him, because, maybe possibly because Zimmerman was kind of being a freaking idiot. So, and mind you, Zimmerman was diagnosed with several mental illnesses after this event and stuff. He had a history of that, I believe. But I'm not sure which news publication said that. Then again, it is very common in this country. It's extremely common in the United States. We've, for one reason or another, we've dealt with like this epidemic of mental illness. Now, not many people will consider chasing someone to be an act of physical violence, but you're forcing the issue and stuff. That issue, and you could potentially harm a person. So yeah, now it's physically violent. Okay. It doesn't matter what you think. Okay. Police didn't talk to anyone to effectively address it. Right, and here we have a blunder by the police and stuff. The police was telling Zimmerman to meet them by the mailboxes. Now, Zimmerman doesn't really work for law enforcement and stuff, so he shouldn't be on a law enforcement task and stuff. And this, which is a common blunder in service-related work and stuff, whether it's customer service at work or law enforcement, whatever. People tend to think that the customer's supposed to do work and stuff. No, they're not. They're not. You're actually working. You're serving the customer, meaning you're working for the customer. Okay. There's a lot of agreement there. All right. You got, people really need to be honest with themselves. Zimmerman's phone call ends. Zimmerman approaches his car. Trayvon jumps from the bushes. Blah blah blah. regardless of what was actually said there, there was a brief aggressively toned conversation because as Zimmerman's approaching his car, when he was, before or after he's on the way to those mailboxes, uh, you know, Trayvon jumps out of the bushes at him, and I mean that could be considered Trayvon's liability there and stuff. Continuing it when it was clearly ended and stuff. Because once Trayvon clears out and they're totally physically separated and stuff, out of attacking range and everything, that could be considered as an end to the conflict. That is an end to the conflict, categorically speaking. Nominally speaking, however you want to describe it to encapsulate the key important detail. And Zimmerman doesn't, yeah, so Zimmerman here doesn't really say anything too provocative, but Trayvon interrogates him. He's like, what the hell, more or less, he's like, what the F is your problem? What the hell is your problem? Zimmerman says that, I don't have a problem. And yeah, saying something like that to somebody whose adrenaline is elevated and stuff is probably not the thing to say, when clearly you just physically chased after that person and stuff, weighing probably more than the average American refrigerator. And but here, the massive escalation, Trayvon punches him in the nose. Okay. Now, in the United States law, there's a principle of proportionality and stuff. You don't decide to over-escalate just because somebody does something like punch you in the nose and stuff. Now, punching a person in the nose still has some implications and stuff. If you punch somebody in the nose at a really bad angle, you could do serious, grievous harm to that person. That person can bleed out to death. They could have brain damage and stuff, because when you're attacking this area of the body, there's a lot of blood flow that goes there. You have your jugular veins right here. I think it's on the left side right here. And there's a lot of important nerves that run through the neck. I don't know, the jugular veins are somewhere and stuff, but these veins carry a ton of blood supply and stuff. So like when you're hitting a person there, you should not only expect that person to violently protect themselves, not necessarily aggressively, but just they should probably scramble to protect themselves. And that person will likely take it as a threat and stuff, as guarantee, even though it isn't really a threat to life. But yeah, you punch somebody at the wrong angle of their nose, it becomes a serious issue and stuff. When I'm reading this, my mind is just picturing like something coming straight here and the nose kind of bending there, like something bending the cartilage and stuff. But if somebody is a trained puncher and stuff, they're probably gonna aim for the side panel of the bone right here, or something straight up here, something disabling enough. Depends on what manner of training and mindset they have. But in many cases, there isn't lethal blood loss, but it's still a possibility. And yeah, but anyway, somebody saying something provocative is not a reason to smash them in the face like that. You have to have an extremely good reason to smash somebody in the face in that situation. Not saying you have to come up with a really good reason. There has to be a very good reason for that, like that person's intending murder or whatever. It's something like that. So, So Zimmerman claims that this punch allegedly knocked him onto the grass. I mean, I don't know what kind of a punch would knock a big man like that to the grass, but it did. And by his account, and that's very interesting to me. I don't know what Zimmerman was doing with his feet in a situation like that. If you're in a situation like that, you probably want to, take some kind of a powerful stance or something. Because, like, hello, like like the person you're dealing with might actually, end your life possibly. So, you have not only the legal right to defend, to survive that situation and stuff in most cases, um, and but you know yeah, there, life has value, blah blah blah. We can talk about, like, um, get into the whole philosophy behind it and stuff, but it's really not necessary. uh, uh, hmm, hmm. Yeah, Trayvon begins to ground and pound him. He's furthering the assault there and stuff. Though this can be considered as all in the same breath, it's not necessarily fair to accuse Trayvon of carrying it out too far by sending him to the ground and pound and stuff. Though he did escalate it. Um, Zimmerman had not been in any kind of vehicle at the time, so he would not be looking for Trayvon. Though it can be reasonable expectation that Zimmerman would show up at another time to come look for him. Um, and yeah. Zimmerman alleges that Trayvon, during this altercation, had grabbed his head and slammed it into the concrete. Well, how about that? So basically, Zimmerman doesn't know how to fight and stuff, but he knows how to chase people with a pistol on his side. And you know, he knows how to, quote unquote, be the neighborhood watch and stuff that is just everybody's hero, making sure that nobody's in danger of any 17-year-olds walking in the rain carrying candies and candy juice. What the? Oh my god. This bro. I'm sorry. I'm trying to be focused here, but this is just, I don't know. The level of stupid is just unbelievable. It's some, and yeah, during the from the allegations, Zimmerman, he says he feels Trayvon grabbing to his side, like his, near where he has his pistol, and so Zimmerman thinks that Trayvon's reaching for his pistol. Fair, fair, and so uh, Zimmerman decides to shoot Trayvon with the pistol and stuff. We went from being grounded and pounded, possibly to death, to shooting somebody with a pistol and being involved in some serious legal proceedings and stuff. This is what Zimmerman signed up for, physically, so to speak, and stuff. Um, and you know, now I have no objections to people um, carrying, to people having the ability to protect themselves in public, um, regardless of how an aggressor decides to do so. But for the love of God, like, you know, try like try your best to avoid this type of a situation. If if a possible perp and stuff, somebody who's not confirmed to be a perpetrator, is running away and stuff, you can consider that as an end to this situation. You can just say, okay, the possible suspect ran away and stuff. This is what they were wearing or whatever, and if you must report it to law enforcement and stuff. Um, if you feel like this must be escalated, then contact the FBI or something. Like, don't be this. This is This is silly. Anyway, uh, yeah. So this shooting here is basically what leads to Trayvon dying. 17 years old. He had the bloodied sweater that Trayvon was wearing and stuff. In the real world, this is very strong evidence, and it is. It is. Um, and now I still have Bachelor highlighted here and stuff. You know, who is Bachelor? I, you know what? And the police took Zimmerman's gun and handcuffed him. Yeah, you know that probably that makes a lot of sense and stuff, dude. You just killed a 17-year-old kid. The kid was a teenager. Good job, you idiot. Like, what was his justification? Of black crime statistics? What's it's, it's because based off of allegations from you know somebody's 3 mile wide neighborhood where there were black people robbing and killing and raping and stuff, while the rest of the country's probably has a completely different situation. It's, no, I, I, oh my god, it's anyway. It's, Tracy blah blah blah. Not his fiance's condo. Blah. And Trayvon's father never got to see him again. He had to file a missing persons report. A parent did not get to see their child and had to file a missing persons report. Absolutely heartbreaking. Absolutely heartbreaking. I already know the kind of heart sinking that father went through. I know it and stuff. I'm, I'm almost feeling it right now and stuff. It's terrible. This account is absolutely heart sinking. Um, Collected gun residue. Voice stress analysis test. Oh, ho, ho, ho. Wow. Hmm. Wow. Imagine having to. Oh my god. See, this is what happens and stuff. When you make the assumption, oh, I'll be fine because I'll be the victim in this crime. It's not really how it works, buddy. Um, it's 2026. We all know about all of the proceedings and consequences Zimmerman went through for his behavior and stuff. Everything concerning, um, uh, uh, oh my god, persona non grata. That's a good term for that. Um, Fixture and cable news and front page story. That wasn't everything. Um, Sanford Police. There we have Zimmerman, our genius here, who began this dire continuation. And if I'm correct, I believe Zimmerman had a history of mental illness too. Which I think I've already mentioned here. But yeah, even if you don't think it was murder and stuff, or self-defense or something, um, I, I think believe the court ruled it as self-defense, which means it most likely was self-defense. But even if you don't agree with that ruling and stuff, that uh, this kind of ignorant homicide, it should not, yeah, this should not be considered acceptable. It's far from acceptable. Um, Prosecutor Bernie de la Ronda told jurors that Zimmerman was a lying wannabe cop who jumped to the unreasonable conclusion that Martin was a criminal. Well, guess what? There was that unreasonable conclusion, wasn't there? I believed it was, earlier in the account when Zimmerman decided to chase after him. Now, can Zimmerman be considered liable for Trayvon's conduct? Not completely, not completely. And so, but, though I don't believe it follows a linear scale, I believe it has to be um, addressed at whatever level of innocence is there and stuff. And I mean, if there has to be proportionality between any two people in this, then there should be proportionality between uh, the courts and the law enforcement and the people and stuff. I mean, that's fair, right? Um, so, do I consider this to be? Is this a satisfactory account going to the central point of the video? I mean, not really. Not really. Let's go to some things that I wrote down here. This account is a wealth of legally significant information. It doesn't have all of it, which is important. However, that is clear without explanation. What people often overlook in these accounts is that they don't cover the whole surface of what is accountable, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So, I mean, this raises the question, is being foolish a crime and stuff? Or, like, as from a moral perspective and stuff? Like, are we morally liable when we're not like so mentally sharp and aware and knowledgeable and blah blah blah, or quick thinking and so on, all those things that come with being intelligent? Damn, I guess it would have to be contingent upon a person's actions in the past and stuff. Um, there's a difference between simply making the mistake of opposing intelligence and stuff, and you know then and being responsible for some things that are not acceptable, in civilization. And then there's, I mean, I feel like I've kind of veered off from the issue here and stuff, following my own words and getting distracted. Um, I guess a person's only liable when they're a perpetrator, honestly. I mean, there's people who aren't very intelligent who are good-natured, and but there's a blurred line here and stuff. They can sometimes, that doesn't mean a person can't get scared and, really do some crazy rash things. You know, um, and forgive me if this is too boring while I'm thinking about this, but it's important to think about this. So what kind of a mechanism needs to be constructed to evaluate whether a person who is not intelligent is automatically um, deserving of punishment and stuff? Um, because it comes down to how you evaluate or weigh a decision as well. And it comes down to how a person, um, yeah, it comes down to the right way to evaluate the nature of a decision, and it comes down to um, how a person being evil is defined, stuff. So no, being of impaired intelligence a, um, doesn't mean a person is a bad person at all. It doesn't. It just doesn't. And for that reason, um, yeah, yeah. For that reason, AI interpretations probably aren't necessarily fair. So the thing about AIs is that they're a GIGO mechanism, garbage in, garbage out, and stuff. Um, the the quality of an AI's education really leads to how it arrives at conclusions and stuff. Otherwise, it just, you know, doesn't think much better than a person who knows nothing, which is actually extremely rare. Here, the lawyer tries to make some jokes around the case and stuff. Yeah, you probably shouldn't joke around a homicide case. This is probably, um, Zimmerman here tells a police dispatcher that they're funking punks. These assholes always get away. Yeah, you probably don't want to use foul language with police and stuff, because police need to think, pay attention, so um, you have to be extremely careful to watch your language. But Zimmerman knew to censor his own F word, apparently. Um, if this was typed correctly, But then again, they decided to introduce Bachelor out of nowhere without showing like how they originate into the situation. So yeah, I don't think total attention was given to this account and stuff. Um, is there citations here? Oh no, there's no citations given for this account either. How about that? How about that? This is, you know, the Doug. Wow, how about that? Um, uh, yeah. This account here is also referencing Fox News, I believe, too, which was um, repeatedly defrauded in the past uh, to be a, well, fraudulent news outlet and stuff. They they do get a lot of things wrong, and yeah, and I have no qualms about reporting criminals because that's what a lot of people in Fox News are. They're criminals because they peddle lies to people. Um, then here the jury was given the verdict and stuff. Juries are typically vetted, so there's that. I know because I've shown up for jury duty before. I think once or twice. Yeah, I showed up once. Another time I was instructed to do jury duty, but then like the next day I saw the letter says no, you don't have to do it. Okay, fine. So yeah, um, meaning that like I was not selected to do jury duty, so I was given prior notice and stuff. But uh, I have served jury duty before. And here we have some referencing to Zimmerman associating Trayvon with black terrorist groups and black organized crime. Um, uh, on basis that he was black and stuff. Being being black, being a member of a black terrorist group and being a member of black organized crime. Um, Separating the two obvious categories there, it's very, it's a world of difference. Um, Here's referencing Black Lives Matter violence against law enforcement and stuff. Um, when, well, when should violence be visited upon a person? Yes. I mean, that's a pretty obvious question. Getting tickled by my own nose hairs. Um, it's possible that Zimmerman might have had a problem with serotonin and adrenaline and stuff to begin a pursuit like that. All he had to do is just have a conversation with Trayvon, like, "Hey, how are you?" Blah blah blah. Maybe ask him, like, get some information on what's going on and everything, you know. And if Trayvon didn't want to talk to him, wouldn't talk to him and stuff, you know. But you can tell when somebody's carrying a weapon or whatever. You know, Trayvon's not carrying a weapon, which I don't think he was. Um, then you know, you really, like, what case do you really have? Like, okay, somebody suspicious is walking to the neighborhood. Okay, report it to law enforcement. If this isn't if you live in a type of area where there's a huge security concern or there's a lot of high risk individuals and stuff, notify the FBI or something. You know, don't instigate. You know, damn. Kel-Tec 9mm pistol. Kel-Tec. Let's look at the Kel-Tec 9mm. Okay. This is interesting. Kel-Tec P. Oh, whoopsie. Pistol. Kel-Tec. It was a Kel-Tec PF9, apparently, according to the Guardian. This is PF9. That one says PF9 also. Okay, let's just look at the PF9. I don't really think that might have been the correct one. Discontinue. Somebody ruin your brand, huh? Yeah. Okay, so PF9, this thing. Interesting. So if you look under the seam here, you can actually see the this actuation spring here, which I believe drives the rod. Something related to it. I haven't seen a cutaway of the pistol, but and then over here it says it shows that the clearance here is a bit wider than the back. That's single block of 4140 steel. I'm just going to take a moment to look at some things about 14140 steel. So this is very interesting. I'm still pulling the data I need. Just give me a second. Oh my land, Jesus Christ. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so some things like okay, so 4140 steel is a chromium molybdenum alloy and stuff mixed with steel. It's one of many kinds of steel alloys out there. There's probably 80 kinds of alloys, and there's many possibilities for alloys. But so the molybdenum gives it reduced friction and stuff, which is important for pistols. There's a lot of moving parts there that need to be lubricated because the metal is bits of metal very close to each other. And yeah, I mean, then again, this isn't a video about material science and stuff, which is it's something I'm going to talk about effectively enough and stuff, but it's not really something you want to make known to everybody and stuff, or no, anybody. So there's that. And oh yeah, this case had 75 witnesses. Wow. And the investigation was closed on February 24th, 2015.